The 2026 World Cup is the first one to feature 48 teams, but that changes a lot, including the qualifying process. But I've assembled the Avengers of Football Manager database editing, or just this guy Cody, to build the new World Cup qualifying format with the current national team setups. But he built it in a way that it happens over years in the game, so those national team setups can change just the same way they do in real life. And we're gonna find out who's gonna make the 2026 World Cup before anybody else knows. And we start in Asia, where the first round is essentially a play-in round between the worst teams. And I would like to congratulate Mongolia. Genghis Khan turning over in his grave. They are the first team eliminated from this World Cup process with a 7-2 aggregate defeat against the mighty Afghanistan. Bangladesh is through. Singapore is through. Yemen beats Sri Lanka. Myanmar beats Macau. Pakistan dramatically through in extra time. Indonesia beats Brunei. Thank goodness for them. A lot of Indonesians watch this channel and play Football Manager. We don't want them getting knocked out immediately. Hong Kong through. Laos through. And then the real drama of the round, a matchup between East Timor and Taiwan. East Timor was down a goal going into the second leg, but at home managed to score one goal in the first half, and then a dramatic goal from Quintao to take the lead to try and send East Timor to the group stage. But that's when Taiwan scored 2 minutes later, taking us all the way to penalties. So East Timor going to the next round. And in this next round, it's a group of 4 teams, but you gotta finish in the top 2 to advance and stay alive. Not to make the World Cup, but just to make the third round of Asian qualifying. And immediately in the first group, we had a surprise. I mean, Qatar obviously managed to go through because they are the back-to-back Asian champions. But then there was India, finishing ahead of Kuwait and Afghanistan to keep its World Cup dream alive. In Group B, the dear leader was very unhappy as North Korea was eliminated in incredibly dramatic fashion by Japan and Syria. In the second to last match, North Korea managed to win at home against Syria 2-1 thanks to this goal from Kim Chol-min. The men on the final day, North Korea was on 9 points and Syria was on 6 points. The unfortunate thing for North Korea, though, is that they had to play against Japan. And Japan scored 2 goals in the first 11 minutes to take a 2-0 win. This meant that Syria needed to win by at least 3 goals at home against Myanmar. And at halftime, it was only 2-0. But then in the second half, a hero was born. Japan and Syria still alive for the World Cup. In Group C, South Korea was pretty stunningly terrible as China and South Korea managed to advance, but China finished in first. Not only did South Korea draw China twice, it drew Singapore. Singapore only had 1 point in the entire group. Thailand beat them both times. But hey, they're still alive. What do I know? Group D was a little bit easier. Oman coasted through on a massive 16 points, and then we had a tight run into the finish between Malaysia and Kyrgyzstan. It was an incredibly sweaty ending. The second to last match day saw Malaysia beat Kyrgyzstan 2-0 to put Kyrgyzstan on 7 and Malaysia on 6. Kyrgyzstan had to play at Oman, but that match was 0-0 until the 70th minute. But you're thinking Malaysia's gonna go beat East Timor, right? Wrong. That match was 1-1, and then Malaysia got a red card, which meant they were absolutely sweating it out to the end. 1 goal from Kyrgyzstan would have knocked them out, and 1 goal from East Timor would have knocked them out. But Malaysia's World Cup dream survives even though they won just 1 of their 6 matches. Group E was finally more straightforward. No drama here. Iran and Uzbekistan through to the next round, knocking out Hong Kong and Turkmenistan. Although Turkmenistan got to take home a 2-2 draw with Iran as their only point. In Group F, Macwell is in the mud because Vietnam is eliminated alongside Indonesia, with Iraq and the Philippines going through to the next round. In Group G, Saudi Arabia makes it through comfortably alongside Jordan, with Tajikistan and Pakistan predictably eliminated. Then there was Group H, which turned into an absolutely unbelievable Arabian showdown. Laos was eliminated from contention pretty early, but the UAE, Bahrain, and Yemen were all right next to each other. Yemen went into the final day needing one of UAE or Bahrain to lose and needing to beat Laos by a lot of goals. UAE on 10, Bahrain on 10, and Yemen on 7. Yemen went out and took care of business. A brace from Nasser Mohammedo gave them a 4-0 win against Laos. The problem is that Bahrain and UAE drew. Collusion! If UAE had scored 1 more goal in this match, Yemen would have pulled off a really stunning upset to make it to the next round, but it wasn't to be. In Group I, Australia coasted above the fray with 5 wins from 6, and it was a battle between Lebanon and Palestine for second. Going into the final match day, Palestine needed to beat Lebanon. They got to play head-to-head. Lebanon took the early lead, but then Palestine was able to respond in the 69th minute. It needed 1 more goal but it wouldn't get it. Lebanon's miraculous draw against Australia made the difference. Palestine won matches against Bangladesh both times, drew Lebanon both times, and lost to Australia both times. This takes us to the third round in Asian qualifying, the first round where teams can actually make it to the World Cup. If you finish in the top two, then you are going straight there. If you finish in the middle two, you are going to the Asian playoff. And if you finish in the bottom two, you're out. You're not going to the World Cup. Group A was Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Syria, India, and Bahrain. And perhaps the biggest surprise, every team in this group managed to win multiple games. But it would be Qatar that only lost one. The Qatari national team, according to this simulation, does qualify on its own merit for the World Cup for the first time. The one loss, though, was at India. But no, India did not sneak the second spot. That would be Saudi Arabia. They did rather miraculously lose both of their matches to Syria and one of their matches to Qatar, but they pulled out second with 17 points. That meant, of course, that Australia was in the first playoff spot with 14 points. But would it be India or Syria that grabs the second spot? Sorry, Bahrain. It would be Syria, headed to the playoff with 14 points as well. Unfortunately for India, they only had 2 wins the entire time, one against Syria and one against Qatar. They never beat Bahrain, who finished on 7 points, and that was their undoing. If they'd beaten them both times they played them, they would have been in the playoff. But a very good showing from India. Group B had South Korea, Iran, UAE, Malaysia, Lebanon, and the Philippines. South Korea's shaky form was shaken off. They won 7 of 10 matches, won the group, and they're headed to the World Cup, alongside Qatar and Saudi Arabia. They're joined by Iran, who made it out of this group rather comfortably by the end, despite the fact that their second to last match was a draw at home against Malaysia. Remember that Malaysia team that drew East Timor in order to get out of the last round? In third position, the most classic selection for an Asian World Cup qualifying playoff ever, the United Arab Emirates. If you don't follow qualifying regularly, the UAE is basically always in this position, it seems like, even though they've only been to the World Cup one time. And then, rather stunningly, the fourth team is Malaysia. East Timor is a thing of the past, and Malaysia finished 6 points clear of Lebanon and then eventually the Philippines in fourth. Congrats to the Philippines for making it this far, but they were a little outclassed. Then it was Group C to decide the last 2 teams that would automatically qualify for the World Cup from Asia. And this one was closer, but Japan was not involved in that. It would have been a stunner if they didn't make it. Japan won 8 of 10 matches on 25 points. They qualified. The other spot, though, came down to 4 teams: Uzbekistan, Iraq, China, and Oman. Uzbekistan has an incredible history of near misses. They've been so close to the World Cup so many times, but to now, in real life, they have never been. The 2026 World Cup is their best hope. With a couple of matches left to go, Uzbekistan and Iraq were running really close for that second spot. And Uzbekistan managed to grab the 1-0 win at home in Tashkent to take the advantage. Then they got some help from Oman, who managed a 2-2 draw with Iraq. All they had to do was win at Jordan, and they would have a points lead for the automatic spot. And that match was close. It was 1-1 at halftime before Runav popped up with a goal to take the lead. By the final match day, Oman was out of it. Even though they'd managed to draw against Japan and looked really good in the previous round, they just couldn't put enough together. Jordan was obviously out as well. So it fell to China, Iraq, and Uzbekistan. China needed a win against Oman, but they lost at home, relegating China to the playoff. Uzbekistan was at home against Japan. And even though they hung tough for a really long time, Japan scored once in the 60th minute and ended up taking it 1-0 on the road. This meant that if Iraq was able to win at home against Jordan, they would go through automatically. Iraq at home is the only loss Japan had in this entire qualifying section. So naturally, Jordan took the early lead. But right before halftime, Iraq was able to level things. It just could not find the winner. And Uzbekistan hangs on, thanks to Jordan, to go to its first World Cup, with Iraq joining China in the playoff. And the playoff is very simple. There are 6 teams going to it. They are divided into 2 groups of 3. You play the other 2 teams in your group, and if you win the group, you go to the World Cup. If you finish second in the group, then you go to the playoff, the World Cup playoff. And if you lose the group, you're out. The first group was Australia, Iraq, and China. And Australia started off with a strong 3-1 win against Iraq. These are all at a neutral site venue, by the way. So Iraq goes into their next match against China needing a win, and they deliver in a way that they weren't able to in their last two incredibly important matches. 3-1 dub for Iraq, which means China has to beat Australia to create complete chaos. But Australia gets a hold of it early. An 8th minute goal from Garang Kuol, and then another from Nestori Irinkunda, and then a third. Australia had a 3-0 lead, and then Zhang Shenglong gets sent off for China. But unbelievably, China mounts a comeback. They score a penalty in the 84th minute, and then Tyus Browning scores in the 89th to make it 3-2. China needs 2 more goals to actually turn its fortune and stay alive. If it scores 2 more goals, Iraq, despite its win over China, would actually be eliminated. But the magic runs out. Australia hangs on and makes it to the World Cup by the skin of its teeth again, sending Iraq to the World Cup playoff. Group B were the 3 teams that were left: the UAE, Syria, and Malaysia. The first match was the UAE against Syria, the 2 teams that would probably be considered the favorite for this. And the UAE pulls the 2-0 win. Syria then takes on Malaysia in the same situation as Iraq. They need a win to stay alive, maybe a draw depending on stuff, but they pull off the win. It was late. 74th minute goal to open things up, and they end up winning 2-0. Then Malaysia needs a win against the UAE, and look, Malaysia had an amazing run to be able to get all the way to the Asian playoff in this World Cup qualifying, but not enough. The UAE wins at 3-0 to send itself to just its 2nd ever World Cup competition. And Syria is headed to the Intercontinental playoffs. Syria and Iraq. Except, I lied to you. I hate to admit it. Because only one team from Asia can go to the Intercontinental playoff, and that means that the final action in Asian qualifying is a playoff between the 2 second-place teams, Iraq and Syria. And this tie would be absolutely unbelievable. So Syria is headed to the Intercontinental playoff with an opportunity to make it to the World Cup. Their journey seemingly never ending trying to get there. Next up is CONCACAF. CONCACAF gets 6 spots in the World Cup. The problem is 3 of them are already taken by the host nations, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, meaning that there are 3.5 spots available. I guess it's technically 4, 3 automatic qualifiers, and then 2 teams will go to the Intercontinental playoff from CONCACAF. And it all starts with a very early play-in. The Virgin Islands derby between the U.S. Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands. And then the first leg, the U.S. Virgin Islands picks up a win, so shout out to the U.S. Virgins 2-1. The other matchups between Turks and Caicos and Anguilla, and despite an early goal from Turks and Caicos, Anguilla jumps out to a 3-1 lead. But here is where we would be treated to some of the best drama of all of World Cup qualifying. The U.S. Virgin Islands hangs on for a 3-2 aggregate win to keep its incredibly faint World Cup dream alive. But in the other match, Turks and Caicos is at home, and Providenciales against Anguilla, needing a multi-goal win. And by golly, they got it. The next round of qualifying is essentially a bunch of groups of 5, where if you finish in the top 2, you advance to the 3rd round, pretty similar to Asia. In Group A, Honduras handles its business and goes through with 4 wins from 4. That's right, you only play every other team once, not twice. Cayman Islands and Bermuda were eliminated pretty soundly. And the battle for second fell between Cuba and Antigua and Barbuda, who, luck would have it, played on the last match day. Antigua and Barbuda would score to take the early lead. And based off goal difference, Antigua and Barbuda needs the win here. But in the second half, Cuba finds a goal from Reece and then manages to hang on to keep its World Cup dream alive. Group B had 2 former World Cup teams, including World Cup regular Costa Rica, who manages to skate through on 10 points. The issue being a draw against Trinidad and Tobago, who of course have also been to the World Cup before. But they actually had a pretty nervous time with St. Kitts and Nevis. See, the Bahamas and Grenada didn't take any points off anybody that wasn't each other, and they both got knocked out. But St. Kitts and Nevis beat both of those teams, setting up a matchup with Trinidad and Tobago on the final match day, where if St. Kitts and Nevis won, Trinidad and Tobago wouldn't even make it to the final round of qualifying. And they took the early lead. But Trinidad and Tobago responded nearly instantly and was able to hang on for a nervy draw on the road to get through to the next round. Group C was an absolute nightmare. See, there's only one team in this group that's ever been to the World Cup before, and that's Haiti back in like 1974. Curacao managed to finish first in the group, its only loss being at Barbados, who had the most confusing World Cup qualifying you will ever see. Playing in honor of Rihanna, they managed to not only beat Curacao, but draw Haiti, while also losing to St. Lucia and Aruba. That is the complete inverse of what should have happened, and feels like a giant missed opportunity for them. And in a battle of ABC Islands, if Aruba had been able to beat Curacao on the final day, they would have taken their place at the top of the group. But Curacao delivered a thumping 3-0 road win to clinch their spot in the next round, while Haiti squeaked out a 1-0 win at St. Lucia to get ahead of Aruba, which is amazing, considering Haiti beat Aruba 7-0 in the previous match day. Group D had former World Cup team Panama win all 4 matches, but then a collection of 4 teams that, quite frankly, never really do particularly well in CONCACAF competitions, and one of them has to go to the next round. Nicaragua, Belize, Guyana, or Montserrat. Considering there's only 4 matches to be played here, this fact is particularly insane. Every one of those teams got a result in at least 2 of their matches. Montserrat finished last with a draw against Nicaragua and Guyana. Guyana drew everyone in the group not named Panama to finish with 3 points. Belize beat Montserrat, drew Guyana, but lost to Panama and Nicaragua. And Nicaragua managed to only lose 1 match to Panama. It also only won 1 game against Belize, but that was enough. On 5 points, that was enough. So Nicaragua's dream still alive. And then in Group E, Jamaica coasted through with 4 wins. The U.S. Virgin Islands, despite the fact that it won its initial game, was out with 0 points. And the Dominican Republic and Guatemala got in a rock fight that the rising Dominican Football Association, they made the Olympics in real life not that long ago, was able to outmuscle Guatemala, a team that is definitely at least sound, to grab their spot in the next round. And finally, we had a group like Group F where things played out exactly lined up the way they're supposed to be. Suriname won all 4 matches. El Salvador won 3. They both go through. Puerto Rico won 2. St. Vincent and the Grenadines won 1. And Turks and Caicos lost them all, despite their heroics in the last round. So Suriname and El Salvador, welcome to round 3. Round 3 is just 3 groups of 4. And you have to win your group to go to the World Cup. If you finish second, you have a chance to go to the Intercontinental Playoff. But you have to be, there are only 3 second-place teams here, and you have to be one of the 2 better ones. If you're the worst second-place team in points or goal difference or whatever, you're out. Group A pitted Jamaica, Costa Rica, Suriname, and Nicaragua against each other. There are obviously 2 clear favorites in this group, Jamaica and Costa Rica, with Costa Rica probably being the team you'd expect to win the group. But things changed on the opening match day when Suriname managed a 1-1 draw at home against Costa Rica. Nicaragua is obviously terrible. Jamaica blew them out on the opening match day, and Nicaragua would finish with literally 0 points and 1 goal. But congrats to them for making it to this round. But Suriname doubled down by getting a draw in Kingston against Jamaica in the next match. And then with Costa Rica losing at home against Jamaica and Suriname beating Nicaragua, Suriname was still running with Costa Rica and Jamaica going into the second round of matches. Match day 4 saw Suriname draw against Jamaica again, with Costa Rica squeaking out its second 1-goal win against Nicaragua. Jamaica needed an 84th minute penalty, though, in order to not lose to Suriname. But then there's the match that would decide it all. Costa Rica against Suriname. And Costa Rica showed its World Cup chops. A 3-1 win at home. Even though Suriname beat Nicaragua on the final match day and finished with a very respectable 9 points, Costa Rica had done enough. But their final match was hugely important. If Costa Rica could beat Jamaica, they would take the automatic spot. If not, Jamaica is going to the World Cup. At home to start the second half, Jamaica jumps out to a 2-0 lead. But Costa Rica responds immediately. Joel Campbell, the ageless Joel Campbell, scores to make it 2-1, then 2-2. The final 30 minutes, unbelievably nerve-wracking. And then, nothing. Jamaica wins. Well, they draw, but they win in the sense they get to go to the World Cup. Group B saw a dominant performance from Panama. They didn't lose a match, and they're going to the World Cup as well. Second place is going to be decided by Trinidad and Tobago and Honduras, with the Dominican Republic not quite at that level to be able to compete. Although they did win away against Honduras, which was the match that made basically all the difference. But Honduras would not go away. On the final match day, they mustered a draw that meant Trinidad and Tobago could not lose. If it lost at the Dominican Republic, it would be out. And honestly, they would both be out because 7 points would be the lowest second place team out of the 3. And Trinidad and Tobago went behind early in Santo Domingo. But a 69th minute goal from my boy Boatswain, which nice, helped them gut out a 3-2 road win to put them in second on 10 points. And that would actually be enough to take an Intercontinental Playoff spot, mainly because Group C is the craziest group you've ever seen. I'm not going to show you which team is which. I'm just going to show you the point totals of the 4 teams in this group. Haiti, El Salvador, Cuba, and Curacao are those 4 teams. But who would end up where? The difference between an automatic World Cup spot and elimination, a point. But if you'd believe it, this was already settled on the final match day. You see, going into that final match day, Curacao and Cuba were on 9, and Haiti and El Salvador were on 5. The problem is Haiti and El Salvador both 1. Curaçao's superior goal difference meant they still finished first in the group, sending them to the World Cup with only 9 points. They lost half their games, but all 3 of their losses were by 1 goal, 2 to Haiti, and all 3 of their wins, including 2 wins against second place Cuba, were massive blowouts. This meant Cuba's goal difference was terrible, but Cuba really fumbled the bag. They were on 9 points after 4 matches and lost their final 2 ties against Curaçao and against El Salvador. I just love the organization of Haiti's scores, though. They beat Curaçao twice, they drew El Salvador twice, and they lost to Cuba twice, both 1-0. I mean, what are the odds of that? So Curaçao goes to the World Cup with 9 points, and Cuba also gets 9 points, but that is the worst third-place finish. So Costa Rica and Trinidad and Tobago are headed to the Intercontinental Playoff. Cuba ends up 1 point away from the World Cup, unbelievably, and Curaçao is going for the first time. And quite frankly, how did Haiti not win this group? Now it's time for Africa, where fortunately things are a lot simpler. See, Africa just has 1 round, basically, of World Cup qualifying in the new format. It's a group of 6 teams. If you win the group, you go to the World Cup. If you finish second, you have a slim chance. If you finish second, you have to be one of the 4 best second-place teams out of the 9, and then you go into a 4-team playoff. If you win that 4-team playoff, then you go to the Intercontinental Playoff. So there's basically no chance if you're finishing second. The first group was won by Egypt, so Mo Salah guiding his team back to a World Cup in 2026. Though the second place was a bit of a surprise. That went to Guinea-Bissau, meaning AFCON semifinalists Burkina Faso didn't even get there and finished just 4 points ahead of Sierra Leone. But Group B is where we start to see the massive surprises, because there's 3 teams that really are thinking they have a chance in this group. Togo and DR Congo are trying to play spoiler, and Senegal is the big favorite. Well, it came down to the final match day. Togo was out of it at this point by goal difference, basically. DR Congo's at home against AFCON participants Mauritania, and Senegal's on the road against Togo. Senegal scores in the first half to take the lead, putting them at 22 points, with a better goal difference than DR Congo. DR Congo at the half is at 0-0, which would put them in second. But in the second half, Mishak Elia scores a goal to put DR Congo in first, and Dr. Congo is headed to the World Cup, while Senegal is going to the absolute nightmare of a playoff, potentially. In Group C, Nigeria played way better than they're playing in real life and won all 10 matches, with South Africa coasting into second. Benin, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, and Lesotho eliminated pretty easily. In Group D, Cameroon held serve, and Cape Verde managed to pull into second place, but with just 20 points, they were already out. Angola, Libya, Eswatini, and Mauritius, see you later. In E, it would be Morocco, cruising on their way to 26 points in a World Cup appearance. The very competitive Zambian team finishes in second, but they only have 19 points. Too many points dropped to Niger, who finished in third, Congo, and Tanzania, a team that Zambia actually lost to on the road. Group F saw the Ivory Coast win on 27 points, so they're going back to the World Cup. Good showing from Burundi, who finished ahead of Kenya. Not a good showing from Seychelles, but they can go back to picking up Seychelles by the seashore. The Gambia, a truly excellent river, managed to finish in second, and that 22 points would be enough for them to at least make the playoff. We didn't have another huge surprise until Group G, and this was a resounding surprise. Guinea dropped 28 points to stun Algeria. Their only draw was actually at Uganda, who finished fourth. Botswana and Somalia were out, even though every team at least managed to win a game. And Mozambique was out of the running pretty early. But Algeria lost both of its games to Guinea and drew Botswana away to finish in second with 22 points. And in case you haven't noticed, there's a lot of teams at 22. In Group H, Tunisia had a tough time, but as they usually do, they came through it with the right result, managing to qualify for the World Cup once again. Namibia finished in second on 20 points, but that would not be enough. Liberia had a very good run on 17 points, but they're out. Equatorial Guinea, who actually has made multiple consecutive knockouts in AFCON, had a terrible time. And then Malawi and Sao Tome and Principe. The final group was Group I, and this is the one that everybody's got circled on their calendar in real life and in this game, because there are two teams that both expect to make it to the World Cup: Ghana and Mali, and they did not disappoint. Chad, Central African Republic, Comoros, and Madagascar, they were just a footnote. You see, this entire group would come down to two matches. Mali against Ghana, both times, and they both won one of them, and neither team blinked anywhere else. Two teams on 27 points. But Mali, much like Uzbekistan in Asia, is a team with enough talent to play at the World Cup that always finds a way not to make it. and Ghana's goal difference was better. So Ghana is headed to the World Cup once again, and Mali, with 27 points, is headed to the playoff. The final second place table looked like this, with Zambia, Namibia, Cape Verde all eliminated because they didn't get to 22 points. But then there were 5 teams on 22. The first one out was Guinea-Bissau. They had the worst goal difference of all of them. And there was only one other team that got 22 points that wouldn't make it, and that was Algeria. Less than 10 years removed from a championship of Africa, they wouldn't even manage to make the playoff, eliminated by Guinea and not going to the World Cup. The Gambia had one more goal difference than them and is the last team in to the playoff, along with Senegal, South Africa, and of course, Mali. The semifinal is randomly selected in this playoff. And remember, the winner doesn't go to the World Cup, they go to the Intercontinental Playoff. It would be South Africa against Mali and the Gambia against Senegal. Mali is the huge favorite because obviously they had an unbelievable group stage, so naturally they get smoked by South Africa 3-0, and they once again are not going to the World Cup in spite of clearly being good enough to play there. And of course, there's Senegal, recently the African champions, who lose to the Gambia 2-0. So all of a sudden, we have the two underdogs, South Africa and the Gambia, playing for a spot at the Intercontinental Playoff. And it would be rather dominantly South Africa that blows out its way there with a 4-1 win against the Gambia. Now to South America, where there's obviously still just one group with 10 teams, but this time 6 teams make it automatically, and one team ends up in the Intercontinental Playoff, the team that finishes in 7th. And there were 3 teams that were very comfortable. Brazil finished with 45, Argentina finished with 40, and Uruguay finished with 40 to cruise into World Cup qualification. Then there was Colombia that was floating almost by itself at 31 points that is also headed to the World Cup comfortably. In 5th, though, a surprise. Paraguay, with a very, very good performance, finds itself at 21 points. Peru managed to finish on 20 thanks to a draw in their final match day against mighty Brazil. And the last spot in the Intercontinental Playoff came down to 2 teams on the final day, Venezuela and Ecuador. Venezuela was on 16 points and Ecuador was on 14. The goal difference was with Ecuador, though, so Venezuela could not draw and have Ecuador win. And that was probably going to happen because Ecuador was at home against Bolivia. And Ecuador took care of business, a 4-0 win against the Bolivians to put the pressure on Venezuela to have to win at Uruguay to keep the dream alive for their first ever World Cup appearance. They are the only team in this entire qualifying section that has never been to the World Cup. And Venezuela scores. 32nd minute, here they are. The problem is the rest of the game had to happen, and that's where Uruguay scored an immediate response and then scored again to sink Venezuela's dreams by a point. Ecuador to the playoff. But now for the qualifying you have all been waiting for. Oceania. The first round is a playoff of the 4 worst teams, and it was actually incredibly electric. American Samoa and Samoa went down to pens after an 85th minute equalizer from American Samoa, with the OG Samoa advancing, and Cook Islands and Tonga had a 90th minute equalizer that then went down to penalties, which Cook Islands won. The final between the Cook Islands and Samoa also went to penalties after a 2-2 draw. But Samoa wins back-to-back penalty shootouts to keep its unbelievably small World Cup dream alive. The next round would see 2 groups of 4 teams battling it out to finish in the top 2. And in Group A, it would be Fiji and Papua New Guinea that would find a way to advance in an absolute bloodbath. 4 of the 6 matches were draws, with Fiji and Papua New Guinea finding the only wins in the group. New Caledonia and Solomon Islands, as well as Rafael Ai, the Solomonesi, were eliminated. And if you're wondering how that happened, the Solomon Islands got 2 first-half red cards in a 3-match group. Kind of hard to advance when you do that. In Group B, it was New Zealand, who naturally coasted to advancing on goal difference. This was close to being one of the most insane upsets of all time. If New Zealand didn't make it to the last 4 of World Cup qualifying from Oceania, it would have been an unmitigated disaster. The first match was a New Zealand win against Samoa, obviously, and Tahiti with a 2-0 win against Vanuatu. Tahiti being oftentimes the second best team in Oceania, that makes sense. The confusion starts when New Zealand at home loses to Vanuatu. This means New Zealand's final match against Tahiti, it has to win. As Vanuatu went out and beat Samoa, and New Zealand went out and beat Tahiti. But the goal differences are very important here. New Zealand, with multiple 2-goal wins, manages a +3. If it had scored 1 more goal against Tahiti, or if Vanuatu had scored 1 more goal against Samoa, more than its 2-0 win, Vanuatu would have gone through. But instead, Vanuatu managed to beat New Zealand, get 6 points out of 3 matches, and get eliminated eliminated anyways. On goals, 4. Absolutely brutal. This takes us to the semi-final. If you win in the semi-final, then you at least go to the Intercontinental Playoff, because OFC has 1 guaranteed spot and 1 playoff spot. New Zealand was drawn against Fiji, and it was still uncomfortable, but they managed to squeak a 1-0 win, thanks to a goal from Joel Stevens. Then it was time for Tahiti against Papua New Guinea. If you win this, then you keep your World Cup dream alive for real. It goes all the way down to penalties, and Tahiti manages to escape with the win. It was not a pretty penalty shootout for Papua New Guinea. The first 3 takers missed. The final match would be for World Cup qualification. The loser goes to the Intercontinental Playoff, and no matter who it is, whether it's Tahiti or New Zealand, they would be the underdog. New Zealand, of course, has the best player in CONCACAF by a mile, Chris Wood, and he scores in the 26th minute to give New Zealand the lead. But then the unthinkable happens. Tahiti levels it. Teanui Tehau scores Tahiti's only shot on target to level the match at 1. And in spite of the fact that New Zealand puts together 2.74 XG, it does not score again. And then in the penalty shootout, Teanui Tehau scores. And then Chris Wood misses. Tahiti has the advantage in the penalty shootout to try and get an automatic World Cup qualifying spot. But then Ro'anui Tina Rauri misses the next penalty for Tahiti, and it stays level until Kitin Maro of Tahiti misses. This eventually sets up longtime MLS player Bill Tuiloma with the opportunity to win it, but then he misses. It would go down to the 8th penalty kick when Frank Papaura missed for Tahiti. And then at just 18 years old, former Man City youth player Marley Leoluai stepped up and scored to send his nation to the World Cup. Tahiti would be going to the playoff, but they were that close to immortality. Now actually to the continent that sends the most teams to the World Cup, Europe. And this is a pretty simple format. They've got a bunch of groups of 4, some groups of 5. If you win the group, you are going to the World Cup. If you finish second, you are going into essentially a playoff system along with a couple of Nations League selected teams, which we couldn't replicate here, in order to get yourself into the World Cup. Group A, very straightforward. Italy with a resounding 6 wins from 6, but an impressive second place finish from Luxembourg that keeps itself alive with an opportunity to go to the World Cup over Northern Ireland and Slovakia, who both have to be incredibly disappointed with the way they've handled things here. In Group B, we got a resounding performance from a team that's actually been a little down recently. Sweden. They won all 6 matches against Slovenia, Switzerland, and Kosovo, with Switzerland actually finishing 3rd. Switzerland, which has made 25 consecutive knockout stages at World Cups, doesn't even have a chance to go because Slovenia is going to be going to the playoff instead. And that is mainly because Slovenia won 1-0 at Switzerland. It was one of their only 2 wins. That, and also Switzerland lost to Kosovo on the final match day. That hurts. If that 90th minute goal is not scored, Switzerland's going to the playoff instead of Slovenia. In Group C, Denmark managed to survive an incredible push from Scotland in order to make it back to the World Cup once again. But a very good performance from the Scots has them in the playoff. Greece continues to disappoint with just 7 points. The real heartbreaker here is Scotland actually had a chance to go, but they couldn't win at Greece on the final match day, ending on a 0-0 draw. If they managed to win that match by a goal while scoring multiple, or win it by multiple goals, they would have gone to the World Cup. The reason they needed to do that is Denmark actually put 8 past Belarus in the other match to pad their goal difference massively. Group D was incredibly well organized. France won every match, Ukraine won every match that wasn't against France, and then Iceland beat Azerbaijan both times. We love an actually orderly group right along the line. France, welcome back to the World Cup. Then in Group E, we had the Netherlands winning their group rather comfortably on 16 points, with Turkey finishing 2nd, Georgia 3rd, and Bulgaria in last. Group F saw Portugal deliver a round complete bit of domination that started a little bit sketchy. They were losing at halftime to Hungary in their opening match, but would go on to drop just 1 draw and 5 wins. While Hungary just edges out Ireland to make its way into the playoff. The Hungarians needed to win against Armenia by multiple goals, and they did, while Ireland held on until a Bruno Fernandes penalty on the final match day, but it wasn't enough. Group G had Spain coasting with 8 wins from 8, while Poland pulled up to 2nd, and then Finland, Malta, and Lithuania were eliminated. Group H was an incredibly disappointing performance from Romania. Ended up finishing behind Cyprus, while Austria pulled away in the end to qualify for consecutive World Cups. Bosnia and Herzegovina sends itself to the playoffs. San Marino does score 1 goal at home against Cyprus. Actually tied the match at the time. In Group I, Germany managed to go through, but not without a bit of sweat from Norway. Erling Haaland led the boys to 19 points and put the pressure on Germany all the way to the final match day, which was quite frankly an epic 4-4 showdown in Oslo that if Norway had managed to win, it still wouldn't have mattered. They would have both been on 21 points. And goal difference is more important than results between teams, and Germany had the better goal difference. But it was a fun shootout. Norway's headed to the playoff with Israel, Moldova, and Estonia out. 3 more groups to go, and we have Belgium making it to the knockouts over Wales, North Macedonia, Kazakhstan, and Liechtenstein. But Wales rather comfortably pulled up into second position. In Group K, England survived a potentially testy group with Serbia and Albania, and the Serbs ended up actually finishing just 3 points ahead of Albania to get the playoff spot. And then the final group saw Croatia handle its business and get back to the World Cup once again, finishing ahead of Czechia and then Montenegro, while the Faroe Islands finished on 5 points, rather miraculously notching a draw at home against the Czech Republic. Now, since we couldn't simulate the Nations League finishes, we created mini playoff groups for each of the second place teams. Instead of the 4-team bracket, it's a 3-team group where you play every team once. The first group was Turkey, Serbia, and Czechia for a spot at the World Cup, and that was claimed by Turkey. The next group was Ukraine, Slovenia, and Wales. But who would be joining Turkey in Ukraine? Well, we would have a team that hasn't been to the World Cup in a long time. Norway. Erling Haaland's going to the World Cup in 2026, baby. He's finished ahead of Poland and Bosnia and Herzegovina in their group. And the final team to make it from Europe to this World Cup was Scotland. Hungary and Luxembourg were defeated, but now it's time for the Intercontinental Playoff. Remember that? The last 2 teams that will qualify for the 2026 World Cup. And the draw is set. The 2 highest seeded national teams await the winner of a first round of 2 matches. The first match, South Africa against Syria. In the second match, Tahiti against Trinidad and Tobago. The 2 highest seeded teams are Ecuador and Costa Rica. So the winner of these 2 matches will play one of those 2 teams. The first match, South Africa against Syria. A one-off match for World Cup elimination, and it's South Africa that would strike first through Percy Tau. And then Bafana in the 72nd minute would grab its second goal. Surely out of reach of the Syrians. But wait. Kardagli, it's Osman! And it's 2-1! Immediate reply, the 93rd minute. It's now or never for Syria. Al-Halak to Sabag! It's Pablo Sabag for Syria! A 2-goal comeback in the final 17 minutes to force extra time. But just moments in, Hlongwaneo! And the unbelievable free kick goal would hold up for South Africa to send them to the World Cup playoff final. The one African second place team that survived the brutal format in Africa now has managed to find a way through Syria. Then there's the island matchup. The underdog Tahitians against Trinidad and Tobago, trying to make their second ever World Cup. It's Tahiti. It's Hapipi. He's got a ball through. Haroy! Oh, Tahiti has the lead! He's onside! Trinidad and Tobago, they've got to be shot now. It's Corbin. Andrews. And it's gone in! It took a deflection off Siena. And it's 1-1. And incredibly, Tahiti and Trinidad and Tobago played a 1-1 through the first hour of the game. And now it's Trinidad and Tobago. It's Andrews. It's Khan. Oh, slippery ball to Andrews! And Trinidad and Tobago have their lead at long last. It was a dominant performance from Trinidad and Tobago, but they could barely squeeze out enough goals to advance. And that brought us to the last 2 World Cup spots. South Africa against Ecuador, Costa Rica against Trinidad and Tobago. An all-CONCACAF showdown for the last spot. In the first match, demolition. Ecuador, who was waiting and licking its chops, unleashed a fury on South Africa. It was a bridge too far for Bafana as Ecuador put 7 past them. A complete meltdown on the big stage. In Costa Rica and Trinidad and Tobago, Costa Rica shows its quality and picks up a 3-0 win to clinch the last World Cup spot. This means your final qualifiers from Europe, Italy, Sweden, Denmark, France, Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, Austria, Germany, Belgium, England, Croatia, Turkey, Ukraine, Norway, Scotland. That means these will be the qualifiers for the 2026 World Cup based off of the actual qualifying system in groups. From South America, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia, Paraguay, Peru, and Ecuador through the playoff. From CONCACAF, there's Jamaica, Panama, Curacao, and Costa Rica through the playoff, as well as, of course, the US, Mexico, and Canada. From Africa, it's Egypt, DR Congo, Nigeria, Cameroon, Morocco, Ivory Coast, Guinea, and Tunisia and Ghana. From Oceania, it's New Zealand via penalties. And from Asia, it's Qatar and Saudi Arabia, South Korea and Iran, Japan and Uzbekistan, yes. Then Australia and the UAE. Those are your 48 teams. Sounds like a sick World Cup. If you want to watch a different type of World Cup where we made the same player the entire team, you can check that out here. But I don't really know why we did this. We just know the United States is going to win this World Cup anyways, so... You know, it was fun though. Enjoyed it.